They had never seen him as more than just a pilot. By the time they realized who he truly was, it was already too late. He had set their downfall in motion. Jordan Richardson stepped out of his car, adjusting the cuffs of his perfectly tailored, navy blue suit. The parking lot of Skylink Airways headquarters in St. Louis, Missouri was packed, an indication of just how many executives were inside. Today's meeting wasn't meant to be anything unusual, just another quarterly review, a routine discussion of financials, expansion plans, and internal policies. But the moment he approached the entrance, he felt it. It always started the same way. The security guard at the door glanced at him, then immediately shifted his gaze past him, as if expecting someone more important to follow. Jordan was used to being overlooked, underestimated. But this time, something was different. A young woman at the reception desk, early 20s at most, barely looked up from her phone. When her eyes flicked over him, her brows lifted slightly, as if she had already made a judgment about him. "Deliveries go around back," she said, her attention already drifting back to her screen. Jordan's expression remained unreadable, but his grip on his briefcase tightened. He exhaled slowly, steadying himself. He wasn't in the mood for this. "I'm not here for a delivery," he said, his voice calm and even. The receptionist gave him another glance, this time with something almost smug in her expression. "Oh, well, maintenance requests are handled online." Jordan blinked. He wasn't wearing a uniform. He wasn't carrying a package. He was dressed like every other executive walking through those doors. And yet, she still saw something else. "I'm here for the shareholders' meeting," he clarified, his patience thinning. The energy in the room shifted. The receptionist's smirk faded. A few nearby employees turned slightly, their conversations lowering in volume. Near the elevators, a mid-level manager in a gray suit, someone Jordan vaguely recognized, watched the exchange, his curiosity laced with something else. The receptionist hesitated before reaching for the desk phone. "Let me just check on that." Jordan knew exactly what was happening. He had seen it before. People struggling to reconcile their assumptions with reality. They stalled, they second-guessed, they looked for a way out. Just then, a middle-aged man in a Skylink Airways blazer approached, glancing between them. He had the air of a long-time corporate employee, one of those who prided themselves on being progressive, the kind of person who would insist they had no biases. "Everything okay here?" he asked, directing the question to the receptionist. She hesitated. "He says he's here for the shareholders' meeting." The man's brows lifted slightly as he turned to Jordan, taking in his appearance. "And you are?" Jordan met his gaze, his voice crisp and unwavering. "Jordan Richardson." The reaction was immediate. The man's face paled, his lips parting slightly. Jordan could practically hear the gears turning in his head. The name meant something to him. Jordan had been with Skylink for 2 decades. He had flown some of the most complex routes, trained countless new pilots, and played a direct role in the airline's expansion. More than that, he had invested millions. His stake in the company wasn't just symbolic, it was significant. And yet, at that moment, none of it seemed to matter. I apologize, Mr. Richardson," the man stammered. "There must have been some kind of misunderstanding." Jordan's lips twitched, something that wasn't quite a smile. "I'm sure there was." The receptionist sat stiffly at her desk, fingers hovering over the keyboard, refusing to meet his eyes. The tension in the room was thick, everyone waiting to see how he would react. But Jordan wasn't interested in theatrics. He stepped past them, his polished shoes clicking against the tile floor as he headed toward the elevators. Behind him, hushed murmurs resumed. They knew who he was now. But knowing his name wouldn't save them from what was coming. The elevator doors slid open on the 12th floor, and Jordan stepped into the executive wing of Skylink Airways. The polished marble floors gleamed under the fluorescent lights, reflecting the steady rhythm of whispered conversations and clacking keyboards. As he walked past, a few heads turned, some with recognition, others with discomfort. He knew exactly why. These hallways had seen him before, but only in a limited capacity. As a pilot, not an owner. As an employee, not an investor. Reaching the glass-paneled conference room, he pushed the door open without hesitation. Inside, 6 men and 3 women sat around a long, glossy table, murmuring among themselves. They were the kind of people who spoke in measured tones, who wore expensive suits but no name tags, the kind who didn't like surprises. At the head of the table sat Douglas Fairchild, Skylink's chief operating officer. He was mid-sentence when he noticed Jordan enter. His words faltered, his mouth still slightly open, blue eyes flashing with poorly concealed confusion. "Mr. Richardson," Douglas recovered quickly, clearing his throat. "We weren't expecting you." Jordan pulled out a chair and sat down, placing his briefcase on the table with deliberate ease. His fingers flipped open the metal clasps, but his gaze never left the COO. "Why not?" Jordan's voice was smooth, controlled. Silence stretched across the table. Douglas shifted in his seat, clasping his hands together. "Well, I mean, your attendance wasn't confirmed." Jordan cut him off. "I don't need to confirm. I own a substantial stake in this company. When decisions are made that affect my investment, I make it my business to be here." One of the women, Linda Greer, a finance executive, leaned forward with a polite, practiced smile. "Of course, Mr. Richardson, we're happy to have you. We just assumed you were occupied with other duties." "Like flying my planes?" Jordan arched a brow. An uncomfortable chuckle rippled through the room, but he wasn't smiling. He let the silence linger, let the weight of it settle over them. They weren't used to being challenged, especially not by someone like him. Finally, Douglas exhaled, leaning back in his chair and rubbing his jaw. "Well," he said, shifting the conversation, "since you're here, I assume you'll want an update on our operational strategy moving forward?" Jordan tilted his head slightly. "Actually, I'd like an update on something else first." Douglas blinked. "Which is?" Jordan reached into his briefcase and pulled out a neatly stacked, stapled document. Without a word, he slid it across the table toward Douglas. The COO hesitated before picking it up. The moment his eyes scanned the first line, his expression stiffened. It wasn't a financial report. It wasn't about expansion. It was a comprehensive dossier detailing numerous discrimination complaints filed by Skylink employees, pilots, flight attendants, maintenance crews, all citing systemic bias at multiple levels of the company. Jordan watched as Douglas swallowed hard, flipping through the pages. Moments ago, the room had been filled with rustling papers and the occasional cough. Now, an eerie silence hung in the air. Finally, Douglas set the document down and exhaled slowly. "This is quite the accusation." "It's not an accusation," Jordan corrected. "It's documented fact." Across the table, Mark Waller, the VP of Operations, scoffed. "Look, Jordan." He caught himself, quickly rephrasing. "Mr. Richardson, this is the airline business. We hire based on experience and skill. We don't have time for social grievances." Jordan's jaw tightened. He leaned forward, resting his elbows on the table. "So you're saying the dozens of complaints filed by your own employees, complaints you ignored, are just grievances?" Mark hesitated. Jordan didn't give him the chance to recover. "Let me put it another way," he said, his voice razor sharp. "If these complaints came from your son, your daughter, would they still be just grievances?" Mark didn't answer. Jordan let the silence linger before straightening. "I suggest you take another look at that report," he said, "because this isn't just an internal matter anymore." Douglas's forehead creased. "What do you mean?" Jordan tapped the table twice, slow, deliberate. "I mean, I've been watching this company from the inside for years. I've seen how you promote, how you evaluate, how you dismiss, and I've had enough." The room tensed. Douglas exhaled sharply. "All right, Mr. Richardson. What exactly do you want?" Jordan's next words made the entire table stiffen. "What I want," he said, "is about to change the future of Skylink Airways." but they had no idea just how deep the impact was about to be. The weight of his last words hung in the air. The executives exchanged uneasy glances. But no, one spoke. That was the thing about power. Most people in the room were comfortable only when they were the ones holding it. Right now, Jordan was the one in control. Douglas was the first to shift in his seat. His fingers tapped lightly on way. The table, a nervous tick that betrayed his attempt at maintaining composure. "Mr. Richardson," he began carefully, "we take these matters very seriously. If there have been any oversights in our hiring or promotion processes, we're more than willing to—" Jordan raised a hand. "Stop." Douglas froze. "Oversights aren't the issue," Jordan said. "Forgetting to include someone on an email is an oversight. What I'm looking at is deliberate neglect." The temperature in the room seemed to drop. Jordan turned to Linda Greer, the finance executive, flipping to a page in the report. "Linda, tell me something. Why is it that out of the 428 pilots currently employed by Skylink Airways, fewer than 6% are black?" Linda's lips pressed together. She glanced at Douglas, searching for backup. Jordan continued before she could come up with a carefully worded corporate response. "And why is it that in the last 5 years, out of all internal promotions to captain, 0 were given to black pilots, despite some having more flight hours than their white counterparts?" A shift in the atmosphere. Eyes darted. A throat cleared. No one wanted to be the first to say what they were all thinking. Jordan leaned back. "I'll tell you why. Because the culture you've built, whether you want to admit it or not, was never designed to be fair." Mark Waller, the VP of Operations, finally cracked. He let out a short, irritated laugh and shook his head. "Jordan, Mr. Richardson, come on. These kinds of numbers exist everywhere. It's the industry." Jordan tilted his head slightly. "Is it?" Mark scoffed. "Yes, look, this is about qualifications, not race. We pick the best. If the best pilots happen to be white, what do you expect us to do? Lower our standards?" A quiet hum of agreement passed through the table. Subtle, muted. But there, Jordan felt something sharp twist in his chest. He had heard variations of this argument his entire career, dressed in different words, wrapped in corporate language, coded in professionalism, but at its core, it was always the same excuse. Jordan nodded slowly. "Interesting." Reaching into his briefcase again, he pulled out another stack of papers, this time a different report. He slid it across the table, stopping right in front of Mark. "I had a feeling someone would say that," he said smoothly. "So I had an independent firm run a data comparison on your hiring trends over the last decade. Here's what they found." Mark frowned but picked up the document. His eyes scanned the first few pages and then his posture shifted. Jordan watched as realization dawned. "That," Jordan said, "is a breakdown of every single applicant to Skylink Airways over the last 10 years. And what you'll see, black applicants had higher average flight hours than white applicants who were hired over them," Jordan continued. "You'll also see that on multiple occasions, experienced black pilots were passed over for promotion in favor of white pilots with fewer flight hours, more failed simulator tests, and weaker supervisor evaluations." Mark's throat bobbed. Jordan gave it a second to sink in before delivering the final push. "And just so we're clear," he said, voice like steel, "this isn't just my conclusion. This was analyzed independently. And if I can see it, you can bet your ass that an investigative journalist will see it too." Silence. Douglas swallowed hard, his hand flattening against the table. "Jordan, listen." "No." Jordan cut in. "You listen." His voice was measured but sharp, controlled. He wasn't about to let this moment slip. "For years, I played by the rules. I kept quiet. I let things slide because I thought maybe, just maybe, if I proved myself, if I worked twice as hard, things would change." He shook his head. "But they didn't." Jordan placed both hands on the table and leaned forward slightly. "This report," he tapped the stack of papers, "this is just the beginning because I'm done waiting for this company to fix itself. He let that hang in the air, watching as the reality of the situation settled over the room. But they still didn't realize just how bad things were about to get. The tension in the boardroom was suffocating. No one spoke. No one dared to look Jordan directly in the eye. The weight of cold, hard facts sat in front of them, and for once there was no corporate jargon to hide behind. Douglas shifted uncomfortably, his fingers twitching against the table. "Look, Jordan, we recognize that these numbers aren't good." Jordan tilted his head. "Not good?" He let out a short breath. "Douglas, these numbers don't just look bad. They are bad. And they're not just numbers. They're people. Qualified, experienced professionals who were overlooked because this company runs on the same old tired system that protects people like you." Douglas's lips pressed together. "All right," he said slowly, carefully. "Then tell us. What do you want?" Jordan didn't answer immediately. Instead, his gaze swept across the table. These people, executives with real power, had spent their entire careers making decisions that impacted lives without ever having to look those lives in the eye. Now, they had no choice. Jordan straightened. When he spoke, his voice was calm, but there was an edge to it. "I'm pulling my shares." A single second passed. Then, "What?" Linda Greer, the finance executive, sat up so fast her chair nearly slid back. "Jordan, wait, no." His tone was sharp, unwavering. "You had your chance. I invested in this company because I believed in it. I put my money here because I thought we were building something better." He exhaled, shaking his head. "But all we did was build a house on a rotten foundation." Douglas's jaw tightened. "Let's not be rash." Jordan's expression darkened. "Rash?" He tapped the stack of reports in front of him. "Ignoring this for 10 years was rash. Treating pilots like me as disposable despite our experience was rash. Watching qualified professionals walk away because they were sick of proving themselves twice over was rash." He leaned forward. "I'm not being rash. I'm being strategic." Douglas opened his mouth to protest, but Jordan wasn't finished. "I'm not just pulling my money, I'm taking this public." The air shifted, everyone froze. Mark Waller, who had been silent for the last few minutes, visibly tensed. "Jordan, let's talk about this," he said quickly. "There's no need to bring in the media." Jordan arched a brow. "Why not?" He let the question settle. "You just said this isn't about race. You just said you hire the best. So what's the problem?" No one had an answer. Jordan continued. "Because the..." Stood stiffly, behind a podium flanked by 2 senior executives. His suit was immaculate, but the tension in his posture was impossible to miss. A dozen microphones stood before him, each one carrying the weight of a question he didn't want to answer. The murmurs of the press quieted as Douglas cleared his throat. "Good afternoon," he began, voice measured but tight. "I want to address the recent allegations against Skylink Airways." A reporter cut in. "Allegations or facts, Mr. Fairchild? The data is public now." Douglas's jaw flexed. He hadn't even finished his opening line and they were already tearing into him. He inhaled sharply. "We take these concerns seriously and are conducting a thorough internal review." Another reporter interrupted. "Isn't it true that the internal review only began after a major shareholder exposed the company?" A murmur rippled through the crowd. Douglas glanced at the executive beside him, as if searching for backup, but there was none to be found. He straightened his shoulders, trying again. "At Skylink Airways, we are committed to diversity and inclusion. Any discrepancies in hiring or promotion will be carefully examined." "Discrepancies?" A voice from the crowd. "Mr. Fairchild, do you acknowledge that black pilots and employees were systematically overlooked for years?" Douglas hesitated. 1 second. 2. 3. That was all it took. His silence said more than any statement could. Jordan watched it all unfold from his phone, standing in his office with a quiet, satisfied expression. The media wasn't letting up. The investors weren't letting up. The employees weren't letting up. Skylink Airways was crumbling under the weight of its own neglect. And Jordan Richardson? He was just getting started. The COO stepped up to the podium, his usual composed demeanor visibly shaken. Exhaustion clung to him like a second skin, the weight of the past few days pressing down hard. Jordan stood at a distance, arms crossed, watching. Douglas cleared his throat. "Good afternoon," he began, his voice taut. "I want to address the recent allegations regarding hiring practices at Skylink Airways. Let me be clear. This company does not and will never condone discrimination in any form." Jordan nearly scoffed. Douglas continued, reading carefully from a prepared statement. "We are launching a full internal review and have engaged an independent board to assess our practices." Translation: We got caught and now we're scrambling, but no one expected what happened next. A journalist from the Washington Post cut in, "Mr. Fairchild, are you aware that multiple Skylink employees have already gone on record confirming discrimination? Some even claim they reported these issues to HR years ago but were ignored. Are you calling them liars?" Douglas hesitated. That split second of silence cost him everything. The media smelled blood. Reporters started shouting over each other, demanding real answers. The press conference spiraled into chaos. Within hours, a clip of Douglas stammering, sweating, dodging. Questions flooded the internet. By morning, sponsors had pulled out. By evening, major corporate partnerships had severed ties. By the end of the second week, Skylink's stock had plummeted over 40%. The board had no choice. Douglas was forced to resign. Other top executives followed. Just like that, Skylink Airways was in freefall. The final blow Monday morning delivered the knockout punch. A court filing confirmed that a class action lawsuit had been approved, not just from former employees but also from passengers who claimed they'd faced discrimination while flying with Skylink. Sitting in a cafe near Lambert International Airport, Jordan sipped his black coffee, his phone buzzing with another notification. Skylink's stock had dropped another 12% overnight. He had seen corporations fall before, but never one this. Personally, a familiar voice pulled him from his thoughts. "I figured I'd find you here." Jordan looked up to see Lisa Beckett, an aviation journalist who had followed the case from the beginning. She set her bag down across from him, raising a brow. "You don't look surprised." Jordan smirked. "You always show up when there's a storm." Lisa shrugged. "What can I say? I chase the truth." She leaned in slightly. "Now that Fairchild is out, now that Skylink is practically finished, do you feel like you've won?" Jordan exhaled slowly, rolling the coffee cup between his hands. This was never about winning. Lisa studied him. Then what was it about? He leaned back. He had spent years watching talented, deserving pilots be overlooked. He had seen doors stay locked no matter how hard some people worked. "This was about breaking the cycle," he said finally. Lisa tilted her head. "And do you think you did?" Jordan thought about it. Skylink would never recover. The name was too tarnished, investors had fled. Other airlines were rushing to distance themselves, issuing statements about their commitment to diversity, something they should have done long ago. Would it fix everything? No. But it forced a conversation no one could ignore anymore. He met Lisa's gaze. "I think I made them listen." Lisa nodded as if the answer made perfect sense. She pulled out her notepad. "If you have time, I'd love one final quote before I submit my piece." Jordan checked his watch. His flight was soon. But this was worth it. He leaned forward slightly. "Write this down." Lisa clicked her pen, waiting. Jordan's voice was steady. "Power only stays in the hands of a few, if the rest of us let it." Lisa paused, then scribbled the words down. When she looked up, her expression had shifted. There was understanding there now. She closed her notepad. "That's a hell of a quote." Jordan smirked. "It's the truth." He stood, tossing a few bills on the table before grabbing his briefcase. Lisa watched him for a second. "So, what's next?" Jordan turned at the door. "I keep flying." And with that, he walked out. Because this was never just about one company. This was about change, the kind that would last long after he was gone. If this story made you think, if it made you question the way things are, then that's exactly the point. True change doesn't happen when we stay silent. It happens when we demand better. If you believe in that, subscribe for more stories that expose the truth. And remember, real power is knowing when to use your voice.